Cymbeline. During the time of Augustus Caesar, Emperor of Rome, there reigned in Britain a king whose name was Cymbeline. Cymbeline's first wife died when his 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, were very young. Imogen, the eldest of these children, was brought up in her father's court, but by a strange chance the 2 sons of Cymbeline were stolen out of their nursery when the eldest was but 3 years of age and the youngest a small infant. And Cymbeline could never discover what had become of them or by whom they were conveyed away. Cymbeline was twice married. His second wife was a wicked, plotting woman and a cruel stepmother to Imogen, Cymbeline's daughter by his first wife. The queen, though she hated Imogen, wished her to marry a son of her own by a former husband, she also having been married twice, for by this means she hoped upon the death of Cymbeline to place the crown of Britain upon the head of her son Cloten, for she knew that if the king's sons were not found, the Princess Imogen must be the king's heir. But this plan was prevented by Imogen herself, who married without the consent or even knowledge of her father or the queen. Posthumous, for that was the name of Imogen's husband, was the best scholar and most accomplished gentleman of that age. His father died fighting in the wars for Cymbeline, and soon after his birth his mother also died for grief at the loss of her husband. Cymbeline, pitying the helpless state of this orphan, took Posthumous, Cymbeline having given him that name because he was born after his father's death, and educated him in his own court. Imogen and Posthumous were both taught by the same masters and were playfellows from their infancy. They loved each other tenderly when they were children, and their affection continuing to increase with their years. When they grew up, they privately married. The disappointed queen soon learnt this secret, for she kept spies constantly in watch upon the actions of her daughter-in-law, and she immediately told the king of the marriage of Imogen with Posthumous. Nothing could exceed the wrath of Cymbeline when he heard that his daughter had been so forgetful of her high dignity as to marry a subject. He commanded Posthumous to leave Britain and banished him from his native country forever. The queen, who pretended to pity Imogen for the grief she suffered at losing her husband, offered to procure them a private meeting before Posthumous set out on his journey to Rome, which place he had chosen for his residence in his banishment. This seeming kindness she showed the better to succeed in her future designs in regard to her son Cloten, for she meant to persuade Imogen when her husband was gone that her marriage was not lawful, being contracted without the consent of the king. Imogen and Posthumous took a most affectionate leave of each other. Imogen gave her husband a diamond ring, which had been her mother's, and Posthumous promised never to part with the ring, and he fastened a bracelet on the arm of his wife, which he begged she would preserve with great care as a token of his love. They then bid each other farewell with many vows of everlasting love and fidelity. Imogen remained a solitary and dejected lady in her father's court, and Posthumous arrived at Rome, the place he had chosen for his banishment. Posthumous fell into company at Rome with some gay young men of differing nations, who were talking freely of ladies, each one praising the ladies of his own country and his own mistress. Posthumous, who had ever his own dear lady in his mind, affirmed that his wife, the fair Imogen, was the most virtuous, wise, and constant lady in the world. One of these gentlemen, whose name was Iachimo, being offended that a lady of Britain should be so praised above the Roman ladies, his countrywomen, provoked Posthumous by seeming to doubt the constancy of his so highly praised wife. And at length, after much altercation, Posthumous consented to a proposal of Iachimo's that he, Iachimo, should go to Britain and endeavour to gain the love of the married Imogen. They then laid a wager that if Iachimo did not succeed to his wicked design, he was to forfeit a large sum of money, but if he could win Imogen's favour and prevail upon her to give him the bracelet which Posthumous had so earnestly desired she would keep as a token of his love, then the wager was to terminate with Posthumous giving to Iachimo the ring which was Imogen's love present when she parted with her husband. Such firm faith had Posthumous in the fidelity of Imogen that he thought he ran no hazard in this trial of her honour. Iachimo, on his arrival in Britain, gained admittance and a courteous welcome from Imogen as a friend of her husband, but when he began to make professions of love to her, she repulsed him with disdain, and he soon found that he could have no hope of succeeding in his dishonourable design. The desire Iachimo had to win the wager made him now have recourse to a stratagem to oppose upon Posthumous, and for this purpose he bribed some of Imogen's attendants, and was by them conveyed into her bedchamber, concealed in a large trunk, where he remained shut up till Imogen was retired to rest, and had fallen asleep. And then, getting out of the trunk, he examined the chamber with great attention, and wrote down everything he saw there, and particularly noticed a mole which he observed upon Imogen's neck, and then softly unloosing the bracelet from her arm, which Posthumous had given to her, he retired into the chest again. And the next day he set off for Rome with great expedition, and boasted to Posthumous that Imogen had given him the bracelet, and likewise permitted him to pass a night in her chamber.